Spring training is almost here, and it is time to project the opening day Texas Rangers roster for 2023. We're going to do all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Now, before we get into today's show, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, we are breaking down the opening day roster. There was an important move that did happen for the Rangers today. Ian Kinsler is back with the Texas Rangers. He is welcomed on to be a special assistant to the general manager, the Michael Young role, if you will, and I'm really happy to see him back with the Texas Rangers. He was enshrined in the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame last season. He was one of the best players in franchise history, one of the most underappreciated players in franchise history, and I just love that he is back with the Texas Rangers with his double play partner, Michael Young, for many, many years. He is the 5th highest WAR in Texas Rangers history, according to Baseball Reference, at 35, just behind Pudge, Rafael Palmeiro, Beltre, and old Buddy Bell. So yeah, I mean, he was really an incredible player, and I'm glad that he is back with this franchise. And it is starting to feel like baseball time. The weather finally warmed up a little bit. The trucks are on their way to Arizona, which means it is time to take a look at this roster. What's it going to look like? There are still some holes. There are still some questions. So it's about a month and a half, almost 2 months, 33 days, I think it is, till opening day. So let's go ahead and take a projection at what that roster will be looking like. I'll be breaking it down into 4 categories of where these guys line up. 100% locks, guarantee they're going to be on the roster, obviously barring injuries. Number 2, probably on the roster. I'd say that means about 60 to 70% chance that I think they're going to make the roster. Segment 3, we go maybe not, about 50% chance of those guys making the roster. And then something has either gone very right or very wrong. And I'm going to be breaking down everybody who has got an invite to Major League Camp. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's look at the 100% locks on the infield, starting with Mitch Garver, Jonah Heim, Nathaniel Lowe. I'm probably going to interchange both of those because he said on an interview that I heard on the radio, I think it was on 105.3, that he doesn't really care. It's interchangeable. He's not going to be offended by either. So let's try and maybe make that switch this year. Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, and Josh Young. I think the only other person who has put out a opening day roster projection already was Levi Weaver of The Athletic, and he left Josh Young out of his 100% locks, which I felt like he did put him in the probably on the roster category that he had, which I felt like there's not really a chance that Josh Young is not going to make this roster, barring injury, which you could say about literally every player that I have in this 100% locks category. I mean, any player could get injured, literally anybody at any time, for any reason at all. We've seen a lot of weird random baseball injuries, but I don't feel like there's a scenario where Josh Young is healthy, where he is not up at the big league level, where they option him down to AAA to get some more seasoning or whatever. The only scenario in my head is, which isn't even a likely one, is that Ezequiel Duran just absolutely blows the doors off out of camp defensively. It shows he's an elite defensive third baseman, and they put Young down to AAA for a little bit just to learn the outfield and put him in left field or put him at first base or whatever. But I don't think that's a very likely scenario and not one that I'm really going to consider. Look at the outfield. I think there's only 2 guys on this roster that are for sure locks in the outfield. One of those is Adolis Garcia, obviously, and the other is Leody Taveras. Taveras is now officially out of minor league options, so he's on the big league roster, and I don't think they're going to risk outriding him for and potentially losing him for nothing. Maybe there's a scenario where they trade him, but I think that scenario is kind of long past. I thought maybe he might be an option in a trade to maybe Miami for one of their starting pitchers, but I mean the Rangers have a lot of starting pitching depth, which is great. So I don't see a scenario where Leody is not going to be at the very least on the roster. I'm pretty darn sure he's going to be the everyday center fielder, and right field is pretty darn locked up for Adolis Garcia. Now let's look at the starting pitching, and oh god, it just feels so good to look at this starting pitching and compare it to where it was last year, and just the amount of pure joy saying, "Oh yeah, Jacob deGrom is a Texas Ranger," and then you have Nathan Eovaldi. Then you have Martin Perez, John Gray, and Andrew Heaney as your freaking 5. Like, I am just freaking beaming. This is the best rotation that the Rangers have had in a long, long time. Honestly, I don't want to say ever, but maybe ever. It's been a long time since the Rangers have been this freaking good, at least this deep. I mean, they've had... Maybe 2010 to 2012, those rotations didn't have, obviously, a Jacob deGrom type. They had, Cliff Lee, who was, not Jacob deGrom, but really darn good for the second half of 2010 and for the playoff run. And they had Cole Hamels at the peak of his powers and Yu Darvish at the peak of his powers in the 15 and 6. Well, they were on the roster in 15 and 16, the 40-man roster. They were existing there. But like just the absolute depth 1 through 5 of like every day, each one of these guys has the potential to go out and just absolutely give you a dominant start and just ruin somebody's day is. It's just a really, really delightful feeling. Then the bullpen, I think there are 4 guys that are absolute surefire, no doubt, 100% locks to make the opening day roster. I think you have Brock Burke, Jose Leclerc, Jonathan Hernandez, and Jake Odorizzi. Odorizzi is going to kind of be in a long man relief role / he's basically starting pitching insurance as the number 6 starter, which the Rangers are probably going to need for at least 5, maybe 10 starts this year. I mean, just looking at how potentially injury prone this rotation could be. Hopefully all these guys are healthy, make all 32 starts, and all of them go like 150 to 180 innings. That's not reasonable. That's not a reasonable expectation to have for any rotation, let alone one with the medical red flags that this Rangers rotation has been stuck with. But still, really good options in the bullpen. Hernandez and Leclerc. I think one of those guys is probably going to be the closer. Burke is probably going to come out in his multi-inning relief role. I don't see them transitioning him to be a starter because they have so much depth ahead of them, and I think they have saved themselves from that temptation, and I think that would not be necessarily a super wise temptation if they were to go that route. Coming up, we're going to look at the guys who are probably on the roster, the maybe nots, and the something has gone either very wrong or very right. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they are the #1 sportsbook in America. That's right, it's FanDuel. And if you are new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features from to make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spread to who will score a touchdown. FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, let's look at some of these guys who are probably on the roster. Let's start with the infielders. We have 3 guys that I think are probably on this roster. Some of them can play actually all of them can play multiple different positions on the infield and in the outfield. And we have Josh Smith, Mark Mathias, and Ezequiel Duran. I really like all three of these guys. And of the three, I think I'm highest on Ezequiel Duran. I think his ceiling is incredibly high. I love what he has done in the minors. I really liked what I saw in a very limited stint at the big league level. There was a little while where he looked overwhelmed, but it didn't last very long. Offensively, his numbers weren't super duper exciting. He put up 5 home runs and 10 doubles in 58 games, 220 plate appearances. That's nothing to sneeze at. Played pretty decent defense at third base, has a absolute cannon of an arm. I think he's really quick, really fast, and his hands are just so incredibly fast. He can generate that power from a guy who is not necessarily the tallest, but I think has a lot of potential to be an everyday big leaguer. Yeah, he is 5'11". I'm not sure he's necessarily that tall, but maybe he is. But I really, really like his potential to be an everyday big leaguer. He might just win that left field job right out of camp, or he might might make some defensive change. I think Ezequiel Duran is kind of going to be just the biggest player to watch in spring training. Obviously, Josh Smith, I think, is a surefire lock to make the roster as the kind of third shortstop, if you will, because Corey Seager is going to be the everyday guy. Obviously, we saw a lot last year where Marcus Semien was the guy to step in at shortstop if Corey Seager needed a day off or a half day off to DH. But when it wasn't him, Josh Smith, I believe, was the only other player who played shortstop for the Texas Rangers this year. Maybe we might have had a little bit of Charlie Culberson in there, but I don't think we're going to have any Charlie Culberson this year. And Mark Mathias, I mean, a really, really nice short stint with the Rangers, and it seems like from how the Rangers were talking about that Matt Bush trade initially, it seemed like Mathias was going to be kind of the throw-in piece, not the feature. But with the way he performed last year in that small sample size, I mean, he might be the feature in that deal. He's 24 years old. Last year, 74 plate appearances, a 919 OPS, 5 home runs, 3 doubles, and 74 plate appearances. That is a really, really solid bench bat, a solid righty to get in there, get some, I'd say a decent number of DH days, honestly, if I had my will. He's a little bit of a defensive upgrade at first base from Daniel Lowe, but Lowe's offense is way, way better. I trust Lowe's 851 OPS to hold up next season, because he had 645 plate appearances, even though the Mark Mathias was a little bit higher. He had basically 8% of the plate appearances that Lowe had. So yeah, but I really, really like him on this roster. In terms of the outfield, we have Bubba Thompson and Brad Miller. I think it's very, very likely that Bubba Thompson is going to be on this roster. Whether he wins the everyday job in left field, I think right now he is the favorite at this point. And I think he has definitely earned being the favorite because of what he did last year. I think that the rule changes are going to benefit him just tremendously. He had a on base over 300. I think that he's definitely got more power in him. He's got a lot of raw power that he didn't tap into because the Rangers were trying to make him, 2010 to 2012 Elvis Andrus, of just slap a bunch of hits all the way around, use bunts, use your speed, use your absolutely blazing speed, which I think is going to be a huge factor in him having a roster spot, because I love Leote, but he's not quite as fast as Bubba Thompson. And with Eli White gone, having a guy with that elite top tier 80 grade speed, I think is going to be something the Rangers really, really want to take advantage of. They've been super aggressive on the base pass. I'm not sure how aggressive Bruce Bochy is in general about swiping bags, but I feel like everyone this year is going to be placing a heavy emphasis with the limits on how often a pitcher can throw over and how big the bases are, and the pitch clock as well. I think that's going to be really, really interesting. The Rangers have been one of the more aggressive teams, and I think that's more of a front office thing than a Chris Woodward thing, so I think they're definitely going to keep that up. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how that plays out. And Brad Miller, it's simple as this. He's owed $4 million, and I don't think the Rangers are going to eat that in camp. I don't think anybody is going to perform well enough to be like, you know what, we really can't afford to have Brad Miller taking up a spot on this roster. He's pretty much just going to be, I think, a DH slash left fielder. I don't think we're going to see much, if any, of him at third anymore, which I think is a good thing. I don't think we're going to see very much of him in right field, or I think he even played a little bit of center field last year, which was just kind of a state of where the Rangers were. But yeah, I don't know that he's going to be on the roster at the end of the year, but I don't think the Rangers just go ahead and eat $4 million to put somebody else on this roster ahead of him. And then in the bullpen of the probably on the roster, I think Taylor Hearn is pretty probable. I probably could have gone with him as a 100% lock, but I'm not entirely sure. I loved what I saw from him in the bullpen. Still bummed out that it didn't work with him as a starting pitcher, but him in a multi-inning relief role, kind of like Brock Burke. I think Taylor Hearn is kind of the reason. I mean, there are a lot of people scratching their heads as to why Matt Moore still hasn't been signed, and why he hasn't been signed by the Rangers, because there was definitely interest on both sides. But I think Taylor Hearn is kind of the reason for that. He is a guy who can put up a similar role. Burke and Matt Moore were both the lefty multi-inning outing guys who you can put in different leverage situations. Just use them when you need them. And I kind of like Taylor Hearn maybe a little bit more. I know his numbers weren't nearly as good last year, but I think that, I mean, obviously a lot of that was just him not being in the bullpen and transitioning mid-season. Whereas if it's from the beginning, it's like, all right, you're going to be in the bullpen, you know what your role is, and I think he is going to be able to excel in that role more easily, and he's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot younger and going to walk a whole lot less people than Matt Moore is. He'll probably sign somewhere. I'm really genuinely shocked that nobody who needs bullpen help has gone out and signed him yet to a 2-year deal. But yeah, I think Taylor Hearn pretty comfortably, probably on the roster. Coming up, we're going to get into the maybe not the bottom tier of the roster, the most intriguing and confusing part of this roster. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories, then you have got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little bit healthier this year. If you're like me and you want to eat healthier, but don't want to compromise on taste, then I have got just the thing for you. You have got to try Built Bars. They are absolutely delicious, and they are healthy for you, covered in 100% chocolate. They are soft. They are easy to chew. They have all kinds of different flavors. If you like chocolate and you like, well, other things, they've got all kinds of other things in there. They've got raspberry flavors. They've got cookie dough flavors. They've got caramel. They've got brownie. They've got coconut. They've got everything that you want. And now you don't need to wait for those Built Bars to get to you by ordering them online. You can still go to Built.com and get whatever you want there. But you can also pick them up at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. You've got to get down there, grab yourself a box, get yourself some Built Bars. You can thank me later. Now, let's take a look at the rest of this roster. Let's start with the maybe not category. I'd categorize this as, I'd say if I were putting percentage on it, about 50-50 that these players make the opening day roster. If we're looking at position players, there's fewer of these guys here than there are pitchers, but again, there's a whole lot of pitchers on there. Anyway, position players, we have Jackson, Clint Jackson, Frazier, whichever one he is going by. I think it's Clint now, but I'm not entirely sure. We have Sam Huff, and we have Joe McCarthy. So all these guys, I think the infield positions are pretty much surefire locked away. Clint Frazier, I want to say that he came up playing third base. Maybe he's always been an outfielder. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, yeah, all these are basically, in the Sam Huff question, it's a question of how healthy is Mitch Garver. At this point, I think he is healthy. He is projected to be ready for opening day to be able to catch. He has been doing long toss. He says he feels great. There is not any complications. And he says that he feels pretty confident that he should be ready for opening day. So I trust that. And I think that Garver is, I don't know. It depends on the actual opening day start. We'll probably look at that a little closer to the actual opening day, whether it's Heim or whether it's Garver behind the dish. I would probably assume that it is going to be Heim and then maybe Garver DHing that day, because I feel like they want to get both of those guys involved. And I would think that Jonah Heim is going to catch most of Jacob deGrom's starts because of his elite framing ability. You pair that with deGrom's elite stuff in command, and my gosh, it's going to be absolutely incredible. But yeah, I think Huff, if there is more of a question with Garver's health, then that's where Huff comes into play. If not, he is going back down to AAA. with Clint Frazier, it's just a matter of, can the Rangers fix what was ailing him? Can they help him hit fastballs like they did Nathaniel Lowe? If they can do that, then he's got as high upside as most of the guys that are competing for that left field spot. We saw what he did in a decently long stint with the Yankees. He is a former top 5 prospect. Maybe Duran's ceiling is a little bit higher than his. I think athletically Duran has got him beat. He's got a little bit more tools. But I think that is definitely someone who I'm going to want to keep an eye on. Joe McCarthy had a really, really great spring with the Rangers last year, went over and played in Asia. I believe it was Japan, not the KBO. He's a guy who you could definitely want to keep an eye on. And but I maybe putting 50-50 on him here is a little bit too high, a little bit too generous. But I don't know. The Rangers really liked him. They brought him back again this year. So I think that really, really says something. Let's look at pitchers. This is kind of the end of the bullpen / middle, the lower leverage relievers, and a couple of starting pitchers as well. We have Joe Barlow, John King, Dane Dunning, Glenn Otto, Josh Sborz, Danny Duffy, Ian Kennedy, Reyes Moronta, and Zach Kent. Yeah, that's a lot of names. The starting pitchers in there are Dunning and Otto. I don't see a scenario where they start out of camp in this rotation unless, like, I don't know, basically Heaney is the only guy who there's like a real question of, like, is he that same guy? Is there like extreme like blow up potential and not due to health reasons? The rest of this starting pitching, I mean, 1 through. But even if that happens, I think Odorizzi is going to slot into that role, and maybe Dunning comes up as the long reliever. But I think that AAA might be where Dunning starts this season. With Otto, it's kind of a 50-50. He's been a starter. I think the Rangers kind of believe in him as a starter. He had some decent results, but I think that he's just going to be most effective as a multi-inning right-hander where that fastball can just play up and that slider can be absolutely nasty. As for some of these non-roster invitees, I think, well, King, I think, is just an actual invitee. I think he's probably making it. Sborz, I never know what to make of Josh Sborz. I've watched him for, 3 years now? It feels like a long, long time, and I still have no idea what to make of him. Of these non-roster invitees, Danny Duffy, Ian Kennedy, Reyes Moronta, those guys are really, really intriguing. I think Danny Duffy has really got something left in there, and I think that by adding the Royals GM to that special advisor role, that's one of the things that he has done really well, is be able to build bullpens. And I think he knows Danny Duffy really well, and because he was in Kansas City for literally his entire career until I remembered that he also signed with the Dodgers last year and just did not pitch because of injuries. And Kennedy is definitely one that could end up making this roster out of camp. And then Zach Kent is a guy who, I don't know, I really like him, and I think that he could be a starting pitcher in this league, but I think he's kind of on that Glenn Otto scale of, like, yeah, he could, but he could also be really freaking nasty out of the pen for multiple innings, maybe even 3 innings with Kent. Maybe that with Otto too. Now let's look at the final category. The something has gone very wrong or very right, and there are different levels of this. Some of these are like something that's gone moderately wrong or moderately right. But for the most part, it is something dramatic has happened in a good or bad way. For hitters, we have Blaine Krim, Yoshi Tsutsugo, Travis Jankowski, Evan Carter, Justin Foscue, Dustin Harris, Luis Angel Acuna, and Jonathan Ornelas. For pitchers, we have Cole Reagans, Ricky Vanasco, Spencer Howard, Daniel Robert, Mark Church, Jake Latz, Fernario Ozuna, Cole Winn, Owen White, Jack Leiter, Kumar Rocker. Now, those last 3, I literally cannot imagine a scenario where they just get called up to start the season. I mean, even if Leiter is just absolutely unhittable, even if Leiter has 6 outings or whatever in spring training and he just does not give up a single base runner and the stuff looks amazing and he has fixed all of those command issues, then yeah, maybe. If Kumar Rocker has figured out his delivery that is not going to tear up his shoulder, or the Rangers just decide to just straight up throw him in the pen, that's the only scenario where I see Kumar Rocker making it up. With Owen White, yeah, kind of similar to both of those guys. If they want to throw him pen, which would be just really stupid, I think, if they threw any of those 3 guys in the pen this year at this point. With Cole Winn, I think he's someone who, if things just go incredibly right and there is an injury and they feel like Cole Winn can do a better job as a fill-in 5th starter than Jake Odorizzi or than Dane Dunning, then that is a scenario. Same with Cole Reagans. Reagans, I think, still has some refinement left in his game. He was probably called up just a little bit too early, but had some decent success. Keeping him in the strike zone is going to be a big key if he sticks as a starter or if he moves to more of a bullpen role, which maybe might be his fate, but he had just really, really bad walk numbers and being able to stay in the zone without giving up big homers because his FIP was just really not great last year. He was not striking out guys. He was walking a lot of guys, and he was giving up home runs as well. Ricky Vanasco, Spencer Howard, those guys who have some incredible stuff. And Howard is a case of things going really right. I think he and Glenn Otto, both those guys, kind of in their ideal scenario in my mind at this point, is fireballing reliever with just elite stuff for 1 to 2 innings. Maybe turns into a high leverage reliever. Maybe turns into a really darn good reliever. But I don't think Spencer Howard is making it out of camp. And I don't know if the Rangers are going to stick with him as a starter. I think it's freaking time for them to just put him in the bullpen, let him shove, let him go to his 1 or 2 pitch mix, which is how he felt comfortable for most of the season, which is why he gave up so many bombs. It's because he's only throwing 1 or 2 pitches as a starter. But in terms of these other guys, I really don't see much of a scenario. Vanasco's also got some elite stuff and some wildness to him. I don't really see a scenario where he, no matter how good his stuff is, I just don't see him coming up right now. Maybe Mark Church, Daniel Robert, those guys have a chance. But I really don't. Same with, I want to say Kyle Cody, but I don't think that he is still on the roster. But yeah, Mark Church is a guy who had a really, really overall positive season. There were definitely some blow-up moments, but could be a part of this Rangers pen for many years to come. And the old Sidewinder, Chase Lee, is another guy that I forgot to include in this category, but definitely deserves to be on there. Oh, and Zach Luttrell is also a non-roster invitee. Those guys, I think something could go really right where they make it up to the big leagues. I really love Chase Lee. He is a right-hander that throws sidearm, kind of gives me right-handed Darren O'Day vibes. Or wait, was Darren O'Day right-handed? He was. So just gives me regular Darren O'Day vibes. I want to say that he still has a contract with somebody. I know he pitched last year, and he's 45 years old. So maybe Chase Lee could be another guy who pitches for the Rangers for a long time and then eventually ends up with the Orioles, because that's what all weird Rangers, slightly effective relievers end up doing. But yeah, so I think my final picks, I was at, there were 4 guys that were left of guys who were going to make the roster. It's pretty much all bullpen. So we have all the 100% locks, the probably on the rosters. We're counting all those. So I think I have 5 spots to pick. Let's see. I will go with Joe Barlow, John King, Glenn Otto, Danny Duffy, and let's go Ian Kennedy. I feel pretty good about those 5 and about the locks and the probably on the rosters. Yeah. It's an interesting bunch, and it's going to be a very fun spring training. I'm excited to finally have some real baseball to talk about, but it is going to be a very fun spring. And just looking at that starting rotation, man, I can't wait for the first video of Jacob deGrom just throwing a bullpen in Rangers gear. It's going to be absolutely electric. I know that all of y'all are on that same boat with me as well. But thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. For your next listen, go check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.